How's it going, my ancient grain bakers? I hope you're having a lovely day so far. Welcome back to the channel. Today I have another whole grain Einkorn recipe for you. We're making something similar to a focaccia, so let's go to the kitchen and check it out. Baking with Einkorn flour is still pretty new to me. I am still in the experimentation / discovery phase. The gluten in Einkorn flour is pretty much worthless when it comes to bread making, so the dough can be extremely difficult to work with. It will not produce tall freestanding loaves, because it does not produce a substantial enough structure for trapping fermentation gases inside the dough. A focaccia type bread was naturally something we had to try, because flatbreads like this one could be made out of pretty much anything. And the result here is a hearty bread with a moist interior, a crispy crust and lots of delicious toppings. And of course you can top yours with whatever you want. So let me show you how it's made, starting with the ingredients. We'll need some whole grain Einkorn flour, yeast, salt, olive oil, water and some toppings. I got some cherry tomatoes and some olives for the first focaccia, because we're making two. The first one will be quick and basic. The second one will be made with a scald. They are both great in my book. I'll just let you decide what works best for you. The scalded focaccia will have a softer crust, so if that's something that you want, then a scald is what you want to use. If you are new to Einkorn flour, you're not alone. This is only my third recipe. Once I make a few more, I will add them all to a separate playlist only for Einkorn breads. And by the way, the rye bread playlist is pretty full already. And I'll make one for spelt flour in the future too. Right, when it comes to the equipment, we'll need a bowl for mixing our dough, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe and something to bake the focaccia in. I'm going to use my trusty Lloyd's Pans pizza pan, which may just be the most versatile piece of baking equipment I own. And just for reference, it measures at around 22 centimeters or 8.5 inches long, 16 centimeters or 6.5 inches wide, and 5 centimeters or 2 inches deep. But you can certainly use a shallower tray with a larger footprint for this bake. Right, let's begin. First things first, temperature control. My kitchen was pretty cool, at around 21 degrees Celsius or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's why I'm using warm water. I'm aiming for a final dough temperature of around 26 degrees Celsius or 79 degrees Fahrenheit. You can find a full video about no-knead bread dough temperature control in the Principles of Baking playlist. Every Einkorn bread will be made without kneading. Kneading this dough is pointless, it'll just make it stickier. Okay, to make the dough, in a large bowl, combine the water, the yeast, the salt and the olive oil. Give it a good mix, make sure to dissolve the salt completely, because this is the only chance you can do it. Then add the flour, grab your dough scraper and mix until there's no dry flour left. And that is all there is to making this dough. It's as simple as it gets. Once you have finished mixing it, double check the temperature, just for reference. If your dough and or your kitchen are warmer, the fermentation will happen more rapidly. If everything's a bit cooler, it will take longer. But we'll go with the same general rule as for wheat dough. Just wait until it's doubled in size, and that is when bulk fermentation will be done. For me, it took around 1.5 hours. The dough is nice and puffy, and now we can continue with the final shaping. But before we do that, we need to prepare our baking tin, and that'll require plenty of olive oil. If you don't want it to be too fatty, just use some baking paper instead of olive oil. When I make a bread like this, I go all out. It's not often that I do this anyway, so I can afford it. Drizzling the dough with oil also makes it easier to handle. Use your scraper to release it from the bowl, and then pop it into the baking tin. Now press it and stretch it gently to fit the shape of the tray. Of course, if your tray is larger, don't stretch it out too much, you don't want it getting too thin. Try to still keep it to the same dimensions as mine. Or double the recipe and just make one big tray. Or whatever you choose to do. After stretching the dough, apply the toppings. And then using your fingertips, press them into the dough. Usually your focaccia will be topped just before baking, but we are topping this one before final proofing. And that's because it will be quite fragile after the final proof. And we don't want to deflate it. The final proof will be pretty quick, 45 minutes to an hour. During this time, preheat the oven, 220 degrees Celsius, fan off. And that is 430 degrees Fahrenheit. Once your dough looks nice and puffy, it's ready for the oven. I will add a couple of finishing touches before I bake it, with a little bit of dried oregano, some sea salt, and of course I had to put some more olive oil on there. Alright, now this bad boy is ready for the oven. It won't take very long, around 25 minutes should do it. Once it's nicely browned all over, it is ready. Because the gluten is so weak, breads made with Einkorn flour come out a little bit crumbly. So if you are using a deep baking tin, like I am, take care when you take the bread out of it, as it can break. Of course, using some baking paper would solve that issue. You could just lift it out of the tray. And there you have it. That's how you make a basic Einkorn flour flatbread, quote unquote focaccia. I'm quite happy with how it turned out. When you're using Einkorn flour, you cannot expect the bread to be the same as when you're using wheat flour. Einkorn is more like a light version of rye, so you have to go into it with that kind of expectation. But of course there are some adjustments that can be done to change the result. The crust of the basic focaccia is quite crispy, and I wanted to see what the scald will do to a recipe like this. In fact, I had never tried scalding einkorn flour, so here's the second version. We're taking a portion of the flour and mixing with a portion of the water. We're using boiling water to gelatinize the starch in the flour. After mixing, we'll leave the scald to cool down for a couple of hours. Once it's cool enough, we add the rest of the ingredients, the remaining water, the yeast, the salt, the olive oil. We mix everything until it's nice and smooth, then add the remaining einkorn flour and mix it to a dough. From here the process is exactly the same as in the previous recipe. Bulk ferment the dough until it's doubled in size, transfer it to a greased baking tray or a non-stick paper-lined baking tray, stud it with your favorite toppings, leave it to proof until it's nicely puffed up, add any finishing touches that you'd like. A focaccia always benefits from a sprinkling of sea salt. And then finally bake it, leave it to cool down and enjoy. And if you're not familiar with the scalding method, you can find a full video about it in the Principles of Baking playlist, along with many other useful videos. When it comes to baking wheat flour breads, that playlist contains pretty much everything you need to know, at least when it comes to being a home baker. The rye bread playlist, along with all the rye bread recipes, will give you a good overview of the principles of rye. Spelt is quite similar to wheat, just a lot weaker. A lot of the same principles apply. You just have to account for the weaker gluten. But when it comes to einkorn, I still have not wrapped my head around it. I know that some of you have been using this flour for a while, and it would be great if you could share some tips in the comments of this video. Perhaps there are some methods or some ingredients that can be used to make an einkorn dough behave more like wheat dough. I don't mind working with this flour. It's just that because of what it is, it's not very versatile. You can make so many different breads with wheat flour, while the number of different breads you can make with einkorn is quite limited. Of course various breads can be made with it, it's just that the results might not be as desirable. Scalding is definitely something I will look into more, because the scalded focaccia turned out pretty nice. Like I mentioned earlier, it has a softer crust, it's more bouncy, more moist, and it's a bit heavier, but in a good way. You can try out both methods, see what works best for you. The basic recipe takes just a couple of hours from mixing to baking. When it comes to the scalded version, it will take a couple more. It's well worth the wait though. And if you do try this recipe, or any other of my recipes, or any one of your bakes, don't forget that you can post a picture of it on our Flickr group. You can find a link to it down in the video description or in the pinned comment in the comments section. So what do you think this recipe, and what is your einkorn flour baking experience? Share it down below. If you want to see more videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.